Greetings, friends. Thank you for tuning into the Hobie Surfboards channel. Today we have quite a treat for you, a visit to Surfing Heritage and Culture Center in San Clemente, California. The founder, Dick Metz, was gracious enough to give us a tour of the museum. We're also in the company of one Tristan Mausse of fantastic acid surfboards. We hope you enjoy this visit and stay tuned for many of Dick Metz's antics and stories.
Okay, well, nobody knows when surfing really started, but what we do know is when Captain Cook discovered Hawaii in 1778. This is when we were having the American Revolution, and he had an artist on board that drew this picture. And here's the first recording history of anybody on a surfboard. So in 1778, they were surfing in Hawaii. We don't know if they started the day before Captain Cook got there or 100 years before he got there. But in 1778, they were surfing. So that I always start here because that's really the beginning of surfing's history, at least as far as we know. Now, let's go back this way now. And the reason I want to come over here is the Peruvians argue the fact that they surfed in Peru before that, but they can't prove it with a photograph or an artist's drawing or anything that's realistic. But the Peruvian government sent us this to show that they did surf in Peru early, but there's no hard record of a specific date. So the Peruvians think it's before that, everybody else thinks that started. So there's always the argument there. So that's what this is all about. Shows pictures here of guys surfing on it. So that works, and they did do it. These are also artist sketches of the living conditions in Hawaii during 1778. And these are replica boards, these two that we made. They have old replicas in the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, and these were copied off of that with the local wood of Hawaii, na wili wili and koa. It's really hard and dense, and these are the kind of tools they had to make the boards in. They had no electric saws and all the stuff that we have now. So these were pretty rough. Greg Knoll made both of these as replicas for me. So they're heavy, the wood's real dense, and it's hard, it's heavy, it weighs a ton. So right from the very beginning of surfing, it was how can we make boards lighter? Because the only wood they had in Hawaii were these two woods. So early on, the Matson Steamship Company from San Francisco transported goods to Hawaii, and redwood was grown all around San Francisco, and it's considered junk wood. You can't build a house with it, it's too brittle. So they used it as hatch covers on the Matson merchant ships. So when they got to Hawaii, they'd throw these hatch covers over. And this is a redwood board made in Hawaii, but it's not local wood, obviously, but it's lighter than this stuff. So redwood became the dominant wood because it was lighter and easier to work with than the local woods from Hawaii. So even though these were made in Hawaii, the wood came from California. That's how it got there. So these are all pictures of how the life and surfing were from artist sketches in those early years. So in Hawaii, as you know, the water is warm, the air is warm, and they were naked most of the time anyway, which I'm sure all the guys liked. I don't know about the girls, but here's the girls surfing naked, and the guys too. But the missionaries came to Hawaii real early, not long after that picture was, or that artist sketch was made, and that they right away got a religious connotation in Hawaii. And so the kings in different islands had a different form of government, and the missionaries tried to change that. And because they're all walking around naked because of the weather, just the normal circumstances, they put Mother Hubbard dresses on the girls and changed the whole culture for a little bit and tried to outlaw surfing because they considered it a bad sexual connotation. And they stopped it on Oahu and Maui, but on the outer islands, they kept surfing. So when the missionary, and that only lasted for maybe 50 years. So the surfing kind of decreased over 50, 60, 70 years. And then by the late 1800s, more tourists started coming to Hawaii. There was more ships coming that way, going to the Orient, whatever. And surfing started getting a rejuvenation because the Mother Hubbard dresses went away. Those are ridiculous in a hot climate, wearing dresses around your neck. And so the missionary influence started to deteriorate and went down, and the surfing came back up. So that area crossed there in the 1800s, it kind of died, and that's why Duke Kahanamoku is considered the father of modern day surfing. When they say modern day, they mean from, you know, our era coming forward. So he was a swimmer, and so the Olympic Games, the first modern Olympic Games were 1896 in Athens, Greece, and he didn't go to that game. The next one was Paris in 2000, 1900, I mean, I was thinking today. And so he was a great swimmer, won gold medals at the Olympics, and because of his swimming prowess and notoriety, he talked up surfing. And he was obviously a good surfer, so when he had a chance, he would surf. So that rejuvenated surfing, and it got more notoriety through his Olympic achievements. But after he was in 4 different Olympics, won several gold medals, and then Johnny Weissmuller came along as the younger swimmer. See, Duke was on the American surf team, even though Hawaii was not a state then, but it was a protectorate of the United States. So then Duke got second and got silver medals, and Johnny Weissmuller got the golds. And then how Duke got more fame was they were friends and they were teammates, Duke and Johnny. And so Johnny Weissmuller made the first Tarzan movie in Hollywood in 1927. And because Duke was dark-skinned, they made him an African laborer in the movie. So he was in the Tarzan movies, not as Tarzan, but as just a laborer carrying stuff on his head. And so he made some money, and that's when he lived in California. So that really started the whole history of surfing. They were surfing in California, but there was probably, I don't know, 50 guys maybe that tried to surf, and that's when these other boards, well, this is Duke here, and he had 5 brothers, and they all surfed. And here's another picture of him. This was his board. So I lived in Hawaii for 30 years. I knew Duke, surfed with him, talked with him, drank beer with him. I went over there in 1951, so I became friends with him. And that's where there are 7 known Duke boards that he either made himself or surfed on. And 1 he left in Australia after visiting over there. 1 he left in Waikiki, and we have the other 4. So these are several of them, 2 of them right here. And this one's famous because he made the Dole pineapple ad, and this is the board here, this board, with the Dole pineapple ad. So all these I got from Duke when they didn't have much value, and I would be on the beach with them and started collecting boards. I had the Hobie shops, for those of you who don't know this. I owned all the Hobie shops in Hawaii. I had 12 stores there, and so most of them were in Maui. And I got him to donate the boards, and in those Hobie surf shops, I had started this museum. It wasn't a museum then, it was just a bunch of old surfboards that I collected from Duke and other friends of mine that were beach boys in Hawaii. So then this picture is, this is Duke when he was working on the movie, the Tarzan movie, and they came down to Corona del Mar, which is a beach right up by Newport, before the harbor was there. There's big breakwaters now, so it's pretty calm in there, but there weren't breakwaters in 1927, and a fishing boat turned over, and Duke paddled out and rescued the fishermen on that boat, and he made 2 boards with a V on them. These 2 guys are the Vultee brothers. Their dad was a big airplane manufacturer, Vultee aircraft. But Duke made these 2 boards on the beach at Corona del Mar. We gave one of them to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. So that one is on display there, and we have the other one. So that's how all that kind of came about. So these are all solid redwood boards. This one is ridiculous, it's so heavy. I think it's 111 pounds or something.
That's quite
Yeah, well, so, there's no rails, it's flat, there's no fin. Because we had no way to attach a fin in those early years. It was long before fiberglass, and you couldn't nail it or screw a fin on. And eventually they put them, but they were only maybe a couple inches deep. As soon as they hit the beach, it'd break off. So here's another one of Duke's boards that his brother had. So when I opened the Hobie store in Lahaina, Duke had died in 1968, and I think that store opened like in 1970, and all his brothers died except the youngest one was named Sarge Kahanamoku. And so I invited Sarge to come over to the Hobie store and be with me when we opened the Hobie store. And so he was all dressed up in a white suit. We have a bunch of pictures of it. And I flew him from Honolulu to Maui. I picked him up and I said, Sarge, when you come over, I know you got that other board of Duke's under the house. Bring that over and I'll pick you up at the airport and we'll put it in the Hobie store. So that's how I got this one. Anyway, these are all how it evolved. This board is semi-hollow. And so from those solid boards around the corner and other ones, that's why I left this one here. So they hollowed out a solid redwood board and put struts in it, put plywood on top to make it lighter. It's always been about making the boards lighter. And so, but they leaked. They didn't have materials. Varnish and fiberglass, of course, were not invented then. So as me growing up a kid, well, there's this one, for example. See, they took this solid redwood board, carved it out like that one, put the plywood on it so it's semi-hollow, and that's why it has a hole in it to drain, because it would leak where these nail holes are. So that's why you see all these pictures in these early years are the boards are standing on their tail blocks to drain the water out. And as soon as it drained out, you'd put a wine cork in there, paddle out, but depending how much water you got, you had to come in, because once it got enough water, it'd sink, and you couldn't save it. You had to get into the beach before it started to sink. So I surfed on, this was made by Lauren, this is Lauren Harrison here. This was made by Lauren, his board. So all the boards, we have about 850 boards in total, but there's 150 or so down here. And these are all, I know who made them, who owned them. These are not just boards that somebody donated. We have the most historic boards in the world that we know all of the history about them. They've been photographed, measured, everything about them. Lauren gave me this board, so when I started this museum, all these guys that I grew up with that are now dead, most of them, I had them donate their boards to save this history. So that's why this museum is light years ahead of the rest of them have some older boards, but they don't know whose it was, how it was built. And these are all from the guys that I surfed with myself for years. I've known Lauren, and this is Peanuts Larson. He made this board on the beach at Laguna, and this is a board I learned to surf on. I've had it since I learned on when I was 6 years old. He took me surfing on this board. It has no fin, it weighs 109 pounds. It's flat as a tabletop, and it works, but it's that's where it all began. So this is how the whole surf industry evolved from what it is today, and we're talking about in my life. It's not like it was 3,000 years ago. This has been in the last 75, 80, 90 years. So it's come a long ways in a relatively short time with the material, changing it, and the aerodynamics of surfing. Obviously the shapes of the boards has made a huge difference. So you can see from the way we've come. And then the next innovation to make boards lighter was balsa wood. And balsa wood is only grown in Bolivia in South America, and it's rare. So we thought it was great because it was way lighter, but it absorbs water, not like other wood, and it turns, this has got varnish on it. But if at first we didn't put varnish on, it would soak up and turn black, and then it would just rot. So that didn't work. So these are all steps, solid redwood or solid boards, then solid redwood, then semi-hollow, then balsa wood. These are all steps in the evolution of making the boards lighter. And so this was a trial and error for several years. This is all balsa wood. So they put redwood on the rails to protect the balsa wood, and then they varnished this, but as soon as it hits the sand or a rock or something, the varnish would come off. It'd been in the sun too long, peel off, and then they had to put patches in here like these are to save the wood from rotting and getting black. So that was another thing that didn't work for very long, or it was one step in evolving the boards. And this is a board, a guy named Bob Drever was his name, but these two boards are really important. I think they're almost more important than any other boards here. But these two guys in the Second World War worked for Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach, and they were the first ones to get the fiberglass on the tail and fiberglass on the nose on both these boards. So these were two real good friends that worked at Douglas Aircraft. And during the Second World War, England invented a bomber called the Mosquito bomber. And it was a light bomber made late in the war to carry a bigger bomb load to fly across the English Channel and bomb the Germans. And they tried to make it out of balsa wood. And the balsa wood didn't have any integrity or enough strength to make the airplane work. So they invented fiberglass during the Second World War to wrap the balsa wood with fiberglass and resin to give the balsa wood the integrity and the strength it needed to work the airplane. So right during the end of the war, these two guys working at Douglas got scraps from England they sent over to see what they could use it for commercially. So right away they put it on their surfboards. So this is the first use of fiberglass on any surfboards that we know of through that process I just told you. There's a picture of Duke on the beach at Waikiki there. So that's how all this, so once fiberglass was discovered, then all of a sudden, these are all fiberglass boards from here on. So it changed the whole thing. The boards could be made totally out of balsa wood, so the weight dropped from 80 to 100 pounds to 30 or 40 pounds. And they cut the weight more than in half. So all of a sudden, women could start surfing, young kids could start surfing. Because when I grew up, that redwood I showed you that I learned on, I just left at the beach. Nobody could steal it because they couldn't carry it. And there wasn't many guys that wanted to surf with no wetsuit, a big board that had no fin. You know, it wasn't a lot of fun. It was kind of a punishment, really, more than it was fun. And so this changed everything. So right away, you come to solid balsa boards covered in fiberglass and different shapes. That's why all of these along here evolved into the Malibu Chip that I guess we're going to talk more about. So all of these are boards made roughly in the 50s, and they started getting a better shape. So this is a Malibu Chip with finer rails, a little rocker to it, but most of all, it had a 7-8 inch deep fin that you could actually turn the board with. On that redwood, we would stand up and drag a foot in the water, or maybe you'd drop down on your knees and stick your arm in the water, and it would bring it around slowly, but you couldn't whip it around. And so the fin being deeper really allowed surfing to really increase in popularity and fun and more, it just worked better. You know, you could really surf it, where before on those redwoods, you'd just ride the whitewater. You know, a lot of times the wave would break, you couldn't get in the tube or anything. You just ride the whitewater straight in. So this was a huge, in my mind, the biggest development in surfboard innovation of all these years. So these are all of the 50s. Balsa wood, here's Hobie and Quig and all the rest of them, Velzy. And balsa wood then became hard to come by. It's only grown in Bolivia, and there wasn't enough of it. And so once they surf, when I was surfing, I don't think there were 100 guys in the world probably surfing. It wasn't that much fun. It wasn't, and guys weren't motivated, and you couldn't surf, but very few places like San Onofre, Doheny, Palos Verdes Cove, where the wave broke a lot softer and you could ride the whitewater in after the wave had broken. So once we got to this stage, then you could really start surfing, not like they do today, but at least you could whip the board around pretty good and surf bigger waves and a lot more places than you ever could before. But balsa wood, you can see these are pretty clean balsa wood. It came 4 inches thick, and we'd go to LA and get it and bring it down. It would be in a lumber yard up there. They were the only ones that imported. And I'd go with Hobie and Velzy would go up there and take an ice pick, and all you could see was the end of the balsa wood because they're stacked in racks. And we'd stick the ice pick in the end, trying to find the softest wood. And then you'd try and pull out the sticks that were the softest ones. And then as it got more competitive, everybody got pissed off at everybody else, and they wanted to be there first and get the softer wood. And so Hobie was one of the first ones that realized that we're running out of material to make surfboards with. What are we going to do? The balsa wood in Bolivia, the forests were not that big, and so they were running out of material. So Hobie and other guys, then we come on down here. I'm going to skip a lot of this stuff, but that's when the foam era came into being. So in the 57, 58, Hobie started making foam, but we didn't know, we were kids then, and we didn't know how to do it. These are some of the things that we made. I was working in Laguna. We had a secret place. Hobie had his little garage where he made surfboards, but he was trying to build foam, and there was no styrofoam. You know the difference between styrofoam and high density polyurethane foam. So it was real soft. So we had that, but it was so soft you couldn't use a tool with it. It would tear, and you couldn't, fiberglass would dissolve it. So that didn't work. So you had to come up with a new foam. So these are some of the examples of it. Here's grubby. I worked, this is the bucket I used. I was the first pourer at Hobie Foam. So originally it was Hobie Foam, and he made boards that we called the Easter egg boards. So the foam, I would pour that bucket with a little mixer in there, stir it up, but it didn't stir it up that well. And then I'd pour it in this heavy cement mold, would drop it down, but it would be like making a waffle, and the material didn't it didn't move enough. And when it did go off, some of it would go off and get real hard as a rock, and then down at the other end it'd be real soft. So these we called Easter egg boards because the foam cost money to build them then. We didn't want to throw it away. So if you can imagine, there would be pock marks or holes in the foam that we had to patch with Bondo, which is like you'd patch a fender on a car with. And then we'd cover it with fiberglass and use pigment in the resin to cover it so nobody would see this, because if with regular foam you'd have these big ugly patches. So these were Easter egg boards. We had 3 colors, kind of a red one, a white one, and this blue one. So that was the beginning of the foam industry in 1958 and 59. And it wasn't until 61 or so that we figured out when we would make the foam, stir it, pour it in the mold, the humidity and the temperature in the morning was different than it was in the afternoon. We were kids, well, we didn't know all that stuff, so it took us a couple of years to figure out that we had to get this under control, and that's when polyurethane, polyethylene foam became tighter celled and more important. They perfected it, but then by 61, you have clear foam, and it looks good. And this is not paint. Pigment is really expensive and heavy, so that was against making the boards lighter and cheaper. So we wanted to get away from using pigment in the resin. So then all of a sudden, in 61, you could go to a clear foam board with clear resin and save the hassle and the expense, and it looked pretty good. So that took about 3 years to go through that period to get to really how they really work today. Now the only difference being is the different shapes but the material is pretty much the same. I mean, it's changed some, and now they're getting more exotic with new materials. But before I leave this, I'll just point out Dale Velzy was a competitor of Hobie's. That's a picture of Dale. And before he died, this is where he made his surfboards in back of his house down in San Clemente. And so before he died, I was known him since we were kids, and we used to drink whiskey together, and he'd tell me his story. So we have that on tape. But he gave us this shack. So we tore it apart and brought it up here and rebuilt it. And everything in there, those are all his tools, his hats, the empty beer bottles are all his. I even swept up the floor before we brought it up here. All those shavings were on it before. So this is all Dale's, and we have a video of him making surfboards here in this shack that we get school kids to come here on tours and show them how it was made in this shack years ago. So this is all awesome. How the thing has evolved basically in my lifetime.
That's awesome.
Did you get along with Dale's goose that he had?
His what?
Goose?
Oh yeah, the goose. Yeah, he was always had animals. Well, he got busted.
You had a pet goose. Yeah.
No way.
Well, Dale was a neat guy, and he got arrested. He didn't pay his income tax, and he got arrested early on. And so from then on, he used to live in Hermosa Beach. That's Manhattan's where he grew up. And I had to go up and stay with him. And then he came down here and competed with Hobie. And he just played low key because he didn't want to pay income tax. And he hid out and he was a cowboy and a hot rod guy and a surfer. So he was a neat guy. So here's some more of the old tools, block planes and stuff that Vail used. And here's the shoes that we used to use glassing boards with the resin. When you'd squeegee the one side of the board, the resin would drop on your shoes. So those are what happened with the resin on a lot of shoes. So of course later on they had the electronic tools. There's some old ski racks from the first swim fins. And then in the board department, by then it was getting more competitive, more board shapers, and the model board. So that's the first Phil Edwards model that came out. Hobie was the first one to model, and then Dewey Weber and Greg Knoll, they all came out with models of well-known surfers' names on them. And so it gave you, instead of just one kind of a board you had originally, you could have different shapes, and whoever was winning some contest would make a board that he liked, and then you could order that for one that you might like. So this is all shows how that happens. And that's Joyce Hoffman's Hobie board. That shows the removable fin. Originally all the boards came with a glassed on fin. And when I opened the stores in Hawaii, it cost $10 to air freight from Dana Point to Honolulu a board with a fin on it. They weighed it, they didn't cube it. And so it was $10. And all of a sudden one day I got a bunch of boards from Hobie and they were $20. And I called Hobie up and said, God, they started cubing because the fin's sticking out. I said, you got to get rid of the fin. I'll put it on when it gets to Hawaii. So he made the removable fin. That's what made that happen. So that had a big bolt that went through it. And I put it on in Hawaii, and the board rate went back to $10. So all that's how it happened. So then this was 1972, 3, 4, and the shortboard revolution started. So I'm not an expert on all the short boards, but this is how all different manufacturers, guys are experimenting with not only one fin, but 2 fins, 3 fins, all kinds of different convex, convex boards. So here's examples of all those. And then the drug culture came along. Guys were going to Africa and Indonesia and putting dope in the boards, and then they'd get busted when they came back to America, and everybody's going to jail and getting high, and that was the whole period in here. And so to bring it to a conclusion, so here we are with, I always like to show this one, because this board rode the world's biggest wave. And so now they added, so here we've gone, in this life, the boards have gone from 100 pounds down to 5 or 6. And now when they're doing toe-ins on big waves, they're adding weight. So this is lead that's been put on the boards to make it heavier, going the opposite way that we've been going all this time trying to get them lighter. They got too light because when they're towing in and there's a lot of wind, there's a lot of chop, the boards are bouncing around, so they want more weight. They got to have foot straps. And so this is a board that had the world's record at, what's the island off here? Help me.
Todos Santos?
What?
Is that Todos Santos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was 73 feet or something. That was before they started surfing in Portugal. But that's where we are now.
And that's a wrap, friends. Thank you to Surfing Heritage and Culture Center and founder Dick Metz for the excellent tour through the wood and foam era of surfboard design. Another thank you to Tristan Mausse from Fantastic Acid for building some amazing surfboards for us. You're welcome to check out our channel for the subsequent videos and boards that came out of this collaboration. Y'all are welcome to stay tuned to our channel for all the good stuff that's coming out in the future. We are celebrating 75 years of innovation, so stay tuned for all the good stuff that's coming your way. Thank you.